Please take your seat. Some of you are still outside. I'll be very happy if you came in. This is the last panel discussion for this evening. The speakers are very different from the ones you heard in the three panel discussions that have taken place since this afternoon, since the middle of the afternoon. We have well-known activist, a person who works with a very well-known international non-government organization. We have a political activist. So we are from them going to get their views on how do you make the rural economy resilient. So may I just request the three panelists. We have Dr. Vandana Shiva from NAVDANYA, which is a research foundation for science, technology, and ecology. And she's well known for her activism, for the work she's done. And she's going to speak specifically on GMO, genetically modified organisms, pesticides, and look at international advocacy in this field and forecasting and looking ahead what could happen in the next 15 years, 20 years, all the way up to 2050. Vandana, please take a seat. Let's give Dr. Vandana Shiva a big hand. We're very happy to have also with us Dr. Purvi Mehta. She's a senior advisor and head of agriculture South Asia, I stand corrected. Senior advisor and head of agriculture South Asia with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And she's going to be talking about the activities of the foundation and looking at worldwide agriculture research initiatives and what's happening on the ground here in India. Dr. Purvi Mehta, let's give her a big hand. And we're also very happy to have with us, to ensure there's some gender balance, Mr. Avik Saha. Mr. Avik Saha is the General Secretary of SwarajAbhiyan. As you are aware, SwarajAbhiyan is a social and a political outfit which is currently engaged in taking up various issues which concern farmers and those in rural areas. And he's national convener of the Jai Kisan Andolan. As you are aware, farmers across this country have a lot of grievances. They've been marching on the streets, and there are going to be more big marches planned in the near future, in a month from now. And he's going to talk about improving livelihoods through input subsidies or direct cash support to farmers. So we need to conclude the session by 6 o'clock, but Dr. Purvi Mehta has informed me that she'll have to leave around 5:30 because she has an important meeting. So what we'll try and do is we'll get in the order that I've introduced them. We'll ask all the speakers to speak for roughly about 20 minutes, 20 to 25 minutes. That means let's make that 20 minutes sharp, 15 to 20 minutes. That would leave enough time for interaction and questions from the audience. And since Dr. Mehta will have to leave us earlier, so if there are any specific questions for her, we'll take those first because she'll have to leave in approximately an hour or so from now. So let's start with Dr. Vandana Shiva.
So thank you so much, Paranjoy. Thank you to Ajay Veer Jakar, and thank you, David, for this important initiative. I think we need to overcome all kinds of polarizations. And you mentioned that this is the reason you have the food systems dialogue. Now, my dialogue with agriculture really began in 1984 because I'm basically trained as a physicist. This wasn't my chosen vocation. 84 was the year of the Punjab. You can describe it in 100 ways, but the eruption of the violence, including the Golden Temple episode, as well as 2nd December, Bhopal. And Bhopal is what woke me to pesticides. That year, I was working for the United Nations University. I asked them if I could look at what was going on in Punjab and the pesticide issue. And they did, and that's how the book, The Violence of the Green Revolution, came out of that UNU study. And of course, the good thing is when you enter a new field in an innocent way, you learn much more, rather than when your mind is totally trained and conditioned to only see what you want to see. And I read every book, every text, to understand how we got into this situation. And it's literally in 2 decades that Punjab was destroyed, because 65 drought is when the conditionalities were applied to impose chemical farming. I won't go into those details. I also, in that period, found this amazing book. I think one rough copy had been left in the IR library, which we then got into circulation and printed. It is what completed the puzzle for me, because my mother had chosen to become a farmer after the partition. It's not that I didn't know farming, but the only published literature was chemical farming, industrial agriculture. Your experience was about other systems of farming, but there was no literature. So the first book that talked about indigenous agriculture was Albert Howard's Agricultural Testament. And then we reprinted it many times over. Many not-for-profit publishers have brought it out. The Agriculture Testament, I want to just mention 2 things in which, that he writes. He says that when I arrived he was brought to India in 1905 to improve our farming. And he says, when I arrived, he found the fields were fertile. There were no pest damage in the field. He writes, I decided I could do no better than watch the operations of these peasants and acquire their traditional knowledge as rapidly as possible. For the time being, therefore, I regarded them as my professors of agriculture. Another group of instructors were obviously the insects and fungi themselves. He made the pests his professor to understand good farming. And everything about good farming, which is today called agroecology, is distilled from Indian practices of 10,000 years. And the 2 principles he identifies are diversity and the law of return. And diversity is an absolute key to actually managing pests. As he also writes, nature has never found it necessary to design the equivalent of a spraying machine and the poison spray for the control of insects and fungi. Not only do we have the built-in systems in diversity that ensure that you do not turn insects into pests. Nature does not create pests. Bad farming creates pests. Nature gives diversity of insects, as it gives diversity of plants, as it gives diversity of all life. We have destroyed, I think a German study has just come out this year, 75% insects gone. And they're identifying it totally with chemical farming. And as I worked on studying what had gone wrong, as well as promoting a non-violent farming, which has today grown into NAVDANYA, these are the reasons the science of pest control with poisons, pesticides, and GMOs is not working. First, it promotes monocultures, and monocultures are recipes of turning some insects into pests. Chemical fertilizers of crops make plants more vulnerable to pests. These studies were done in Punjab, and I have them all, the citations, that chemical fertilizers make plants more vulnerable to pest attack. There was also a brilliant scientist in France called Chabousseau who found the same thing. Third, emergence of resistance in pests by spraying pesticides. You spray pesticides, you create pests. 1,200 times more pests as a result of spraying pesticides. Fourth, you kill friendly species which control pests, and you disrupt the pest-predator balance. So on our farm, we practice biodiverse agroecological systems. We today have 6 times more pollinators on the NAVDANYA farm. And pollinators provide 1/3 the food that we eat. Pesticides kill pollinators. That's why all the discussions on the disappearance of bees and the harm to pollinators. We have so many insects, including the friendly ones that are doing their work of eating the aphids and the jacids, the spiders, the ladybirds, just packed. And then there are all kinds of other systems that are working. And of course, it was made to look like the GMO technologies were a big leap. And GMO Bt cotton, which engineered to produce a Bt toxin in every cell of the plant all the time, would be a pest control agent. And the advertisements of Monsanto in the early days was, you'll never need to spray. All you have to do is go to Punjab and go to Vidarbha to see how there's much more spraying in the Bt cotton fields than there was before. Last year I visited the hospitals where farmers who had been admitted with pesticide poisoning, and I think it was about 130 deaths. This is supposed to be a technology that made pesticide use redundant. And the reason it has failed is it's based on the same false assumptions about how ecosystems work that chemical fertilizers were based on. The first false assumption is insects are our enemies to be killed. If we let insects be, they figure it out themselves. And no insect becomes a pest. We've experienced it on our farm. When we started NAVDANYA, we had pests and we used to use a lot of neem. Now we don't need to because ecosystems are doing the work for us. This is today being called ecological systems services. And they're now calculating how much beneficial insects contribute. But it's not just beneficial insects. Years ago, when the Bhopal disaster happened, I remember taking neem saplings, because in those days there was no pavements, concrete pavements of Delhi. You know, it used to be soil, and the nimoli used to fall, and neem saplings were growing everywhere. So I filled a bucket with neem saplings, and 3 days later, when we could land after the disaster in 1984, took this bucket to distribute neem and started a campaign called No More Bhopals, Plant a Neem. 10 years later, I find it has been patented. 11 years from 94 to 2005, we fight a case in the European Patent Office. We took 100,000 signatures. I found pro bono lawyers who do the case for us. And we fought the case. It was patent number 5124349 that patented the pest control properties of neem. And we showed we've used it forever. And we have the knowledge. Neem is just one among the hundreds of plants that give you botanical pesticides. But then your amazing new systems. We always planted diversity. There were attractors of pests and there were repellers of pests. And good farming knows this. Now, of course, the push and pull method is being so hugely celebrated. Hans Herren even got the World Food Prize for it. In terms of the future, so the first round of genetic engineering gave us 2 applications, even though I remember in 85 in my debates on GMOs, we used to be told we'll grow food on the moon, we'll grow food in the Sahara Desert, and we are going to be able to grow food on toxic dumps. But at the end of it, all we've done is grow GMO Bt cotton or herbicide-resistant crops. There are only 2 applications, one for pest control, one for weed control. Did it do that job? No, it didn't. The Bt cotton has led to super pests. The pink bollworm can't be controlled. And the herbicide-resistant crops, the soya and corn, particularly in the United States, has led to super weeds. To the extent that half the farmlands in America are now overtaken by weeds that can't be controlled by Roundup, and they're now trying new herbicides like dicamba, and the dicamba drift is so severe that it is ruining trees, It is ruining neighboring crops, and there are cases, thousands of cases. A recent case, I mean, one of the, even though in general terms we call all chemicals used for killing in agriculture pesticides, including herbicides like Roundup, it was known 6 years ago it's a carcinogen. The WHO confirmed it's a carcinogen. The WHO was attacked. The scientists who'd done the work on tumors in rats were attacked. Recently, a court in Canada ruled that a groundkeeper of a school who sprayed Roundup had got cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, because of the use of Roundup. And though the first ruling of one court made the fine 200 something, Monsanto and Bayer, because Monsanto's been bought up by Bayer, and Monsanto basically is the seller of Roundup, they challenged that court order. The next court reduced the fine but has upheld the order, saying there is evidence that this causes cancer. I think we are reaching a tipping point because we had the first generation herbicides, and I want to, we've done this book. I've done this with my sister, Dr. Meera Shiva, who's a doctor, and Dr. Vaibhav Kumar. Children, these are Punjab children traveling on that cancer train from Punjab to Bathinda. These are children in Bhopal being born today. That disaster of 84 is not over. And then in Kerala, where they thought just because you could spray endosulfan from the skies, it was a big technological leap. That's what children of Kasaragod are looking like. That's what the children, with the victims of endosulfan. Now, there is a POPs convention that banned it. The Supreme Court case is still in this country. The costs of the pesticides and the GMOs have already proven to be very high. There is therefore a rush to go under the radar to somehow keep on the treadmill. And there are two ways in which this below the radar entry is happening. One is through the new gene editing and gene drive technologies. So the European Court of Justice just ruled that they are GMOs. They're genetically modified organisms. They modify the genome. Because I was part of writing the biosafety protocol and writing the Article 19.3 in the Convention on Biological Diversity, which says very clearly, modifying the genome. It didn't say how. It didn't say adding a gene. It didn't say editing a gene. And the European system, which is far more scientific, has said this needs regulation as GMO. The US, which has never allowed regulation, which did not allow it at that time, President Bush Sr. walked out of the Biodiversity Convention. And of course, the US negotiator really acted tough on the biosafety protocol, but we got it through, and I won't tell you the inside story of how we got it through. It's a very interesting story. But they've never regulated GMOs. They don't have the science of regulating. They don't have a biosafety regulation. And they are rushing the CRISPR foods. Now, I just noticed they're saying, oh, the big new soya bean that will have no trans fat. Trans fat isn't in the plant. It's through the processing of hydrogenization. When you hydrogenate vegetable oil, you make a trans fat. Now, I'm trained as a scientist, and one of my driving forces is, of course, the love and passion for biodiversity. But my second driving force is an absolutely intolerance for untruth and post-fact and fake science. And I think as far as the history of pesticides, GMOs, including the new GMOs is concerned, this scam must end. How long will you manufacture fake stories like removing trans fat from soya? It doesn't exist in soya. It exists in the process of transforming a vegetable fat. And I think, David, these are follow-up things you could definitely take up. Really get the science right. Just because there's huge amounts of money on one side doesn't mean you can destroy life on earth. Doesn't mean you can push farmers to suicide. Doesn't mean you can maim unborn children. It is really time to take the science of ecology to control pests seriously. It is time to assess the harm of pesticides and GMOs honestly. And I'm trying to do it in every way I can, both through these amazing, the amount of books. We've just finished a book called Biodiversity, Agroecology, Regenerative Organic Agriculture, which is our 31 years of both research and practice. On the new technologies, I have a new book called Oneness versus the 1%. On the patent question, a consolidation of our 30 years of work on biodiversity and intellectual property regimes called Origin, the Corporate War on Nature and Culture, and of course the first book on the violence of the Green Revolution. We have two cases going in the Supreme Court. One is the one that started in 1998 when Monsanto brought in the Bt cotton illegally. That case is still there. And the second is a case on Monsanto trying to challenge our patent laws, which use the exemption of TRIPS, which said countries may exclude from patentability plants and animals. Our Article 3J of the patent law says India does not recognize seeds, plants, and animals as inventions. Therefore, they are not patentable. Monsanto is trying to undo that article. We are in the courts intervening. We have the next date anytime soon. And it is an exciting moment because the effectiveness of agroecology is showing. And no matter how many tricks you bring up on the old paradigm of we are at war with nature, we are at war with insects and their diversity, and the next violent instrument is a superior instrument of doing the job of controlling pests, that narrative has failed. We have another paradigm. That paradigm is ecological agriculture. It is delivering. The evidence is there. FAO just had a huge ceremony to award our state of Sikkim, which is the 100% organic state. It banned every chemical and has turned every policy, its economic policies, its education policies, its environment policies, its climate policies, into a coherent shift to policies that benefit the environment, the farmers, and the citizens of Sikkim. And like I say, it is time to scale that up. We are committed to making India 100% organic. I am committed to a world that is pesticide-free, GMO-free, poison-free by the year 2050. I think we'll get there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vandana Shiva, for articulating your thoughts so emphatically and so persuasively. And I'm now going to ask Dr. Purvi Mehta to speak. And we'll just break a little bit from our convention since she has to leave early. After she finishes speaking, you're welcome to ask her some questions. And then we'll have the discussion with Mr. Avik Saha, and then we can have a slightly longer discussion. Okay, Dr. Mehta.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good to be here. I see a good cross-section of stakeholders here, and you mentioning, Dr. Shiva, you being a physicist. I think that and this panel itself also shows how interdependent agriculture is on various other sciences. So it's high time. I had a farmer in East Africa who had once told me agriculture is too important for just agriculture scientists to look after. So it's good to have that kind of diversity in the room. And I also want to acknowledge you, David. I was at the ceremony last week, and congratulations on the World Food Prize and making India one of your first trips as the World Food Prize winner. So thank you very much. Thanks, Ajay, Shashwati, for the invitation also. I was asked to talk about the foundation's work in India, and the foundation the Gates Foundation has been working in India since 2007, but India was part of our very large global program, and it's not very audible. Sorry.
Just move back.
Right. So in 2014, 2015, we decided to make a little shift in our strategy in India, looking at what is the value that a small organization like us can bring in the large spend that the Indian government already does. The Indian government spends something like $16.8 billion every year on agriculture. What is it that the tiny technology-oriented organization like ours can add value to? And that's when we decided to sort of shift from looking only at the production side to looking at more from the value we can add, especially on the three things. One is the food systems, which I think is the title of this overall dialogue as well. How do you leverage agriculture for addressing some of the nutrition challenges? Number two was gender. Because especially in the states that we work in, like Bihar, Orissa, Eastern UP, and overall in developing countries and especially in India, women continue to play an extremely important role. So how do we, rather than just by, thinking by default women will get involved and get benefited out of the agriculture programs that anybody runs, how do we make that gender sensitive was the second thing. And the third was the income. Because again, as we know, India's large production systems, or India achieving one of the largest food producer of the world status, has not really translated into two very important indicators. One is farmers' income, and number two is nutrition. So even if it is one of the largest producer of food, it has become one of the largest exporter of food and so forth, but producing large amount of food doesn't by default translate into better nutrition for the people. And therefore, what is it that we can bring or add value to? And interestingly, the Gates Foundation has two strategies. One is a nutrition strategy and one is the agriculture strategy. 1/4 of our nutrition strategy is about agriculture, and 1/4 of our agriculture strategy in India is about nutrition. It's mainly to bring that linkages between agriculture and nutrition, especially with two things in mind. One is, Dr. Shiva, you also mentioned about the need for diversification. I think our past history of food production and any experiences we talk about in agriculture is based on maximum 4 or 5 commodities, and that being rice, wheat, milk revolution, and so forth. Very few commodities. So any experiences that we have, most of the policies that we talk about are all based on our experiences on a very, very few commodities. Now, diversification, of course, can have an ecological angle that you mentioned about, but there are two other angles to diversification and the value that it brings. One is the nutrition, and number two is the risk management for the farmers. So if we look at the historical evidences of how Indian agriculture system has worked, the farmer has always looked for diversification. And the diversification they have done is not just because it does two aspects. It is a risk management or risk mitigation strategy for them, both on a production risk. We talk about climate risk, we talk about these risks. The farmer who owns 1 hectare of land, for example, cannot or has classically not been dependent on one crop because it is too risky. If there is a production risk there, and if that crop goes away, what do I do? And therefore, it has always been an integrated mixed farming system. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And so farmer has always seen diversification as a risk mitigation strategy from a production side and also from a market side. Because in case one of my commodities from that 1 hectare fetches me less price, which is quite likely, at least the second commodity hopefully will do better. And the classic example of that mixed farming system is India's crop livestock mixed farming system. And Dr. Nandakumar is here. 84% of India's milk does not come from livestock farmer. It comes from farmers who also happen to be crop farmers. And therefore, this interdependence of that system, and therefore that risk management between the two commodities, where you have one or two crops growing, and you also, by the way, have one cow or a couple of goats there, which is a risk mitigation strategy. And therefore, any policies or any work that we do needs to address this entire thing into a package, which often we have not been able to do. So if we look at the history of the large policy reforms in this country, whether it was Green Revolution, then it was the White Revolution, then it was the food procurement policies of the country, and then more latest, the food bill of the country. They have all been practically focused on three commodities, and especially two, which is rice, wheat, and then, because I mentioned milk revolution, milk. There are a very large number of commodities which are interesting for the farmer because of their income aspect, which needs to be very, very interesting from a nutrition perspective for the country, and also has a lot of other ecological and several angles. And a large number of these very important commodities often remain quite untouched. And therefore, when we were sort of struggling as a small organization, small in terms of what the government spends and what the government's capacities is and so forth, we decided to sort of bring in a little bit of value, if we could, in some of these things. And therefore, diversification became one of our major agenda. The second agenda that we took up, and again, very niche areas, but was the market access. The kind of a different type of a diversification that one sees. This is a country, again, which has at least 80% of the farmer who are very, very smallholder farmer. When you talk about a smallholder farmer, we always talk about the farmer's land holding capacity. But I think a smallholder farmer, one of the very interesting definition to be added to a smallholder farmer is the amount of produce that person, man or woman, brings to the market. And I think that is a key definition. The key disadvantage that person has is because of the lack of economy of scale. Thank you very much. Thank you. And therefore, the market access systems and some of the experiment, and as you know, you will hear me say this many times during these 10-15 minutes, that as a small organization, all we could do is a little bit of few experiments here and there and some piloting. One of the program we rolled out was on farmer producer organizations, basically taking at more of a aggregation of self-help group. The advantage, and this has nothing to do with the Gates Foundation. I think farmer producer organization generally, or basically let's call them whatever else, but the basic advantage of that is, rather than one individual farmer going out there trying to negotiate and buy a very tiny packet of seed which is good enough for their half acre of land and taking only 3 bags of produce ultimately to the market and really not getting a good market price because they don't have a proper agency in the market. They are not taken seriously in the market. What you are basically doing is, when 1,200 farmers come together, when the farmers aggregate, they become a serious player in the market. And we have data and evidences coming from several areas where, the input cost, like seed, for example, because they had a better negotiation, they could reduce there, because now you are buying larger quantity of seed. It's just a question of economy of scale. And now that you are, instead of taking 3 bags of produce to sell in the market, you are taking 4 trucks of produce in the market, and therefore your capacity, you don't always realize better price, but your capacity to realize better price increases. And that's often, the way the reason the cooperative model in the country also got got success, so partly, right? And that, it's mainly because rather than one person going out there and being non-serious, there are more people. So market access became another area. The third area, of course, which is very linked to this, is to capture on one of the first people-centric revolution in agriculture, and that is the digital revolution. I think, often we have seen that, there are agriculture reforms designed somewhere, sometimes most of the time in Delhi, and then, they are kind of taken to the people. Digital revolution, according to me, is a revolution that was people-centric. I remember about 15 years ago, exactly here in India International Center, there was a meeting, and, it was presented about the ICT in agriculture and so forth, and there were lots of questions about people don't have drinking water, you think they're going to have cell phones? Do you realize that there are no roads? Do you realize there are no electricity? Do you think people are going to buy cell phones? The reality is that 86% of India's household, not individuals, household have access to cell phones now. So it did take over, and it's a substantial cost for an average farmer whose average household income per year is about $1,400 per year, and therefore this cell phone became a very important farming equipment. And so how do you leverage on that in taking some of these messages to the farmer? And very interestingly, one of these studies that we did, it showed what are the kind of messages when KVK-like system takes messages to the farmer, as against farmers having their own extension system set up, like WhatsApp group or whatever it must be, and exchanging information. What's the difference between those information? When KVK information, that was predominantly what they were taking to farmer, is production-centric information as to how to produce better, right? That sort of thing. And out of the most of the average, at least 75% of the information the average KVKs were taking to the farmers were in those niche 4 or 5 commodities. When farmers started building their own extension system or, exchanging information, market information came as number 1. Because farmers, this is my pet sentence often. Farmers don't farm only because they are interested in the country's food security. Farmers also farm because this is a very important or only source of livelihood for them. And therefore, income from farming becomes a very important thing for them. And therefore, when they started building their extension systems or, exchanging information, market-related information was number 1. And number 2, linking on what you were just saying, Dr. Shiva, the number 2, what we found was weather-related information, because again, the vulnerability of the farmer on the weather and the ecology. So these are some of the fundamental areas that we work on, and technology wherever, for example, some of the digital technologies where we have invested in some of the production-centric technologies. However, I just wanted to make clear that I look after the Gates Foundation's work across Asia, and we do not work on any of the transgenic work in India. So, for example, we have the Swarna Sub-1, which is now grown by 4.5 million farmers in India. This is an abiotic stress-tolerant variety, but this is, it's very interesting because this is a selection breeding technique. There are close to 1,300 rice varieties which are available. We as a country, we have only commercialized about 6 to 7. Right? And they were all based on higher productivity. What has not been, out of those varieties, what is needed is to be seen is 2 traits which are important, which may be inbuilt in some of those varieties, which may not be as high productivity variety as those 6 varieties that we've been promoting for so many years. One is the nutrition trait, higher nutrition, for example, in which variety of rice, for example. And the second is the abiotic stress, which is the climate mitigation or climate resilience. And so this is generally, but at the end, I'd like to to say that, anything you say about India's agriculture, the opposite also stands true. So any statement that one makes on agriculture, one can always find a different trajectory where it has not worked or it has worked. But given the limited number of states that we work on, these are some of the areas where we are trying our hands on. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to be the last speaker. I can see relief on everyone's face. You are instantly loved. I'll probably not take 15 minutes also. My topic is improving livelihoods, and let's pause and break up each word in this. Improving livelihoods through input subsidies or direct cash support to farmers. So the objective is to improve livelihood. Whose livelihood? Farmers. And the method suggested is through input subsidies or direct cash support. This is what I will address you on for the next 10 minutes. I'll confess that the topic is not one of my liking. I do not believe that food production is something that needs our pity and charity. I don't know what that says of us. When we treat our dinner as a subject of charity, we would all like to be self-sufficient in fighter crafts, guns, mobile phones, set-top boxes. But about food, poor food, it must depend on charity. It must be a subject matter of our deep concern because it is such a weak link in our economy that it needs concern. I'm sorry, it is the most important aspect of any economy as large as India. If we were Singapore, I would have said, yes, let's import all our food. Let's concentrate on something else. But it's simply not possible to look after the source of food production and the producers of India as a serious business. I'm grateful to the organizers that they've understood that the livelihoods of farmers need to be improved. On that, there is no debate. Survey after survey has proved that they live wretched lives. Yet, from the little bit that I've seen of farmers in this country and over a vast geography, I'll be the first to admit that there has been relative improvement in the condition of farmers. Even if you don't look at the NSO data once, what has happened, as Dr. Hussain likes to say, relative poverty has grown. Suddenly, things that my neighbor has become important and desirable to me, and that gives a greater sense of deprivation. What has also happened is a large number of opportunities in the cities have opened, which have necessarily brought children from the villages into cities, into incomes, which they have sometimes taken back to the villages, which now makes the village look quite prosperous from the outside, but the moment you get into it, it is a sad story of envy and not having what 15 years ago I did not even consider necessary to have. That's one of the things that we have taken back to the villages, and we are going to pay the price for it. Most of the anger in India, and I would love saying this, most of the agrarian anger in India is not led by the leadership class of farmers. It is inherent. It was there. After 1.5 years, suddenly we have farmer leaders talking about agrarian distress, leading the charge, so to say. But this erupted quite spontaneously without leadership. All this is a clean segment of livelihood problems. To illustrate, I'm going to use the one area which Kavita and I are well acquainted with. It's called Mandsaur. We camp at a village called Buda in Mandsaur. There are no kacha houses in Buda, and I'm talking about all mohallas. Most of the mohallas have two-storied buildings, and we are often asked to stay at the place which has a western commode. They grow largely cash crops. I've heard whispers of poppy also. But the crops that they grow, cumin seeds and others, are mumfali, they are fundamentally crops that gave them a good livelihood. Over the last couple of years, suddenly, our friend Dilip Patidar has seen his income fall 10%. And Dilip is a sworn supporter of the current political dispensation. There is no doubt in his mind where is his God and what are his political beliefs. When it fell 10%, Dilip took it as luck. The next year, when it fell 25%, Dilip was a little taken aback, but still clung on to his faith. By the third year, when he couldn't sell his garlic, when he couldn't sell his mumfali, and he still had money enough to stock it with the hope that in a couple of months the market will change, Dilip started to have doubts. By the fourth year, he was leading us into his village, explaining why the farmers are in protest, why they were fighting the government that they loved so much. And they probably still do. So it's all a question of income. And that income is something that we as a nation have failed to take to the producers of our vital necessity, food. Why don't we give the farmers enough price? What's the problem? I'm part of a group that keeps yelling MSP, MSP. But I'll tell you openly, as I do behind closed doors, that that's not even half a panacea. That's 1/4 the solution. The core issues are that it is by policy that we do not want farmers to have sufficient income, because that changes all economic game plans. I'll not take you in that zone. My job is to just talk to you about income and whether input subsidies or direct cash support can be a solution. If Dilip Patidar got his DAP, got his urea at cheaper prices through input subsidy. Diesel is a very popular fuel now among farmers. If all of this was cheaper, Dilip would be happier. But Dilip also knows that this still won't give him the price that has been mandated as necessary for his survival. So input subsidy is like is a very frugal solution to a very large and hungry problem. Direct cash support, if it just means direct cash support to the extent of inputs, then again it's a very small solution. But many of our friends have been debating, and we've even written on it, the concept of clearly providing guaranteed income to farmers to make it a viable, worthwhile profession. If improving livelihoods, I mean, improving is a euphemism, sustaining livelihoods, just about keeping livelihoods going, if that is our objective, then an income guarantee to the farmers is something we cannot walk away from anymore. My friend Kavita has done some back of the envelope calculations too. When she addresses you, perhaps she'll bring it up. I don't remember the figures, but it's not astronomically impossible. And if you really translate it into the cost of food on your plate, it's not going to make you poor or take the clothes off your body because you're paying highly for food. A direct support to the farmers through income guarantee is something that we will be looking at very, very shortly, as otherwise the band-aid solutions that even we, as part of the farmers' leadership, are offering is not going to work. So yes, I'm grateful that I've been asked to speak on this topic, which I've never actually attempted to do before. I've always stayed away from subsidy. But if we are serious about the farming population, and believe me, we have no choice, they're roughly about 60% of the people in India. I don't have to tell you how many crores that is, who are directly or indirectly connected with agriculture. If we have to provide them with survival livelihood, we have to get into a direct cash support. I don't mean dole. Let's be very clear. I do not mean reach money to them, Dr. Hussain, irrespective of whether they work or they don't work. I'm asking for the design of a system which many of our planners are capable of doing, where the produce and the remuneration that you get for your produce are balanced in a way where the producer survives, and our only focus is not improved production, the word hybridization was almost slipping me. I'm staying away from it, Dr. Shiva. My point is, the producer needs attention. The producer is going to snatch our attention with or without our leadership. And if we don't quickly change policy, ensure that through income guarantee, we give the producer what the producer needs to be able to survive, we are in deep trouble. And there is no way we are going to be able to provide employment for 60, 70 crore people if we push them out of farming. We are looking at a crisis. We need very, very quick, clever, and long-term solutions, which many people in this room are capable of providing. I'm hoping that the political will on all sides of the spectrum will soon develop so that this crisis is no more a football, but is something that the nation actually needs to deal with and resolve. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Okay, David.
Thank you. I just, Dr. Mehta, you talked about India, but I think the foundation works in other countries in the region, in Pakistan perhaps, in Bangladesh, perhaps in Nepal, Sri Lanka, and I just was going to ask you to just give us a few minutes, if you don't mind, on what you are learning from your work in these other countries as well, just so we could get a regional picture, if you feel like it. Thank you.
Thank you. So within Asia, China is a very, very different story for us. China, there is a China for Africa program that is run by various organizations, and we provide the technical assistance to that. So that's very different. Within the region, Bangladesh, we have several investments, but especially focusing on smallholder dairy, livestock sector, and some of the nutrition-related programs. We have a few programs which are cross-country, and we like to call it as programs without borders, and especially in the same ecological zone of Nepal, Bangladesh, India, and that includes some of the abiotic stress tolerance, that includes some of the market access type programs, especially India, Bangladesh, and we are now starting to work a little bit with some of the regional organizations such as SAHA. So that's how it is. Pakistan, as far as agriculture is concerned, we don't have much, but yeah, these are especially nutrition-wise. One program on nutrition in Sri Lanka, but very little.
Thank you.
Okay, both Dr. Shiva and Saha want to speak, please.
Yeah, because David asked for the wider picture of the Gates Foundation's programs. And you mentioned very clearly that in India, the Gates Foundation is not involved in GMOs. You also now mentioned you have programs without borders. And one of these programs without borders seems to be the BT project. It was rejected in India, there were public hearings, it was put on moratorium, and this failed project was bailed out by the Gates Foundation and taken to Bangladesh and financed. And there is now attempts to bring it back through seeking evidence. But there are two kinds of evidence in Bangladesh. One from the Cornell Alliance of Science, and which is funded by a foundation, and the other from the grassroots, from local scientists and activists and farmers. The second is the Golden Rice Project, which is hundreds of times inferior in getting vitamin A to people. Our work in NAVDANYA has shown how much vitamin A richness our biodiversity has, and all you have to have is that diversity. Our assessments on nutrition per acre show we could grow enough good healthy food for 2 times India's population. And yet this project that isn't working, IRRI admits that it hasn't been able to deliver. Gates Foundation is again supporting that. So you mentioned about the priority of nutrition, but the priority through biofortification is both not meeting all the needs of nutrition, because vitamin A is definitely not the only deficiency. And the iron banana was another fiasco. We led a campaign, the women's movement, and you talked about gender being a priority. Sometimes you should talk to us to get your gender priorities right. Diverse Women for Diversity and Mahila Swaraj. We did an instant campaign, and suddenly India was dropped, and suddenly it became a Uganda project, the GM banana, against the Gates Foundation. So while it is true you're not funding it directly in India, all the failed GMO projects of biofortification, you're keeping them afloat. What's so scientific about it?
So that's what I said. In India, we do not have any transgenic investments. The Gates Foundation right now is the world's largest private foundation, and therefore there are several consortia, technology programs globally where we have investments, and so some of them you mentioned, Cornell Alliance for Science. There are lots of other partners to that also. BT Brinjal, I will have to get back to you on this one because I'm based here and I do not know if we had any investments in BT Brinjal. Because brinjal is not, we do have, as part of our diversification and nutrition project, we do have some of the, within Bihar and Purnia area and all that, but that has nothing to do with BG. So on that I'll have to get back to you on. But one thing is this, the entire abiotic stress tolerant varieties that we have are basically, that is also an EV project as you know, and it is basically a selection breeding program.
Can I just follow up? Many times, every time I've interacted with the Gates Foundation, I've asked for the original plant material, the passport data, which farmer, what variety, because in our seed banks in NAVDANYA, we have the flood tolerant rices. You have selected it. You selected it from the biodiversity that farmers have bred. They would be a little honest and not appropriate to the Gates Foundation this development of this climate resilient trait and honor the Indian farmers who developed it.
Just to say, as a British citizen, I have to also say that the UK government supports orange flesh sweet potatoes, just to add that. So I take responsibility as a British citizen
Part of
for that.
the larger consortium.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That's ridiculous.
I have a simpler question. There are many indigenous technologies, varieties available. The merits could be debated. After all, this is science. They could be tested and proved one way or the other. Does the Gates Foundation have any program or plan to take these forward as part of its larger intervention into food and nutrition?
The market access program I spoke about, the digital extension program I spoke about, the diversification program I spoke about are pretty sort of agnostic to that. For example, we have a digital platform created in Andhra Pradesh and a large number of farmers who are trading through or are part of that platform, for example, come from the huge movement in Andhra Pradesh on what they call it as the zero budget farming. So it's not a commodity specific program. It is not, it is mainly creating this kind of market access type program for livestock, for crops. And it's just, as I said, the farmer producer organization, for example, it can have any commodities that they would be trading through that, in that experiment.
Okay, I think it's time for you to go, Doctor. Yeah, anything? I understand you have somewhere to go. Thank you very much for your contribution and to this discussion. All right. Okay.
There was this at 6 o'clock and
She has a meeting to go to, so thank you so much once again, Dr. Mehta. We'll continue our discussion. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Saha and Dr. Shiva are here. Please, you feel free to ask them any question that you wish to. Yes.
It was very excellent to hear Vandana ji, and particularly you said about Sikkim organic. I am very happy because now we are already trying lots of organics in Vidarbha and other areas. But somewhere I read a report that Sikkim with this organic is not self-sufficient. It is importing almost 1 lakh tons of food grains from outside. How much true it is? Because this is sometimes disturbing us if we have to run a movement of organic. Because if it is not self-sufficient, it is declaring by UN all that, it has no meaning. My point is that if they are importing, so ultimately they are again eating what Punjab is producing. That is what my point.
Okay, that was Dr. Mai. He is, of course, the former chairman of the Agriculture Scientist Recruitment Board. Yeah. Would you like to react?
Yeah. You know, there's 10 times more people coming to Sikkim as tourists. So when you talk self-sufficiency, you have to talk self-sufficiency at multiple levels. And Sikkim is part of India, and if a lot of Indians and other tourists are landing there, then the rest of India has to bear the burden of sharing the food. Of course, even the tourists should eat organic, and Dr. Mike, let's work together to make the whole of India organic. That's what we should be doing.
May I add to that?
Yes,
About Sikkim.
Yeah.
No, Kavita, speak into the microphone. We are recording it and yeah.
Sikkim has moved quite a bit away from food grain production in its orientation to also look at export markets. And if we really want to talk about food self-sufficiency, I think those policy decisions also are, can you just complete? I had 2 points to make. So self-sufficiency when it comes to food has to be also looked at whether the organic push is meant for people eating good, diverse food first before they export, or was it an export-oriented paradigm? The second point is, within the food grain production, productivity is actually showing improvements. That's official data. Within the food grains production.
That's why I'm asking, because this report may not be correct.
One second, Dr. Mai, why
What
don't you
you
speak into the microphone? Yeah.
What they are reporting may not be correct. That is what is my point was asking, whether it is correct or not. Because sometimes what happens is to those who are non-organic, they will also project that you look here, it is happening like this. But my contention is that there is sufficient food in Sikkim where they did not to have it imported from Punjab.
In the villages of Sikkim are self-sufficient. And they're bringing back diversity. They are regenerating the biodiversity of the indigenous foods. But given that we have to undo the damages of 50 years of chemicalization of India, as well as the reduction to monocultures of rice and wheat in most areas, India is, of course, its provinces, its states, but it is also a country. And the food sovereignty as a country as a whole cannot be given a go-by.
Okay, we'll take that last question. One of the amazing things about this seminar is that it's only 10 minutes behind schedule. Almost never happens in Delhi. We have to break up into 2 discussion groups after this. So we'll take this as the last question,
brief question.
And then I'll ask both of you to give your concluding remarks, and then we'll have the discussion. Yes.
So, Vandana ji, I want to ask you, before we listen to you, we spent nearly 1 hour discussing how our agriculture university have failed to deliver the technology, how KVKs have failed, and the complete extension system has collapsed. And now we have listened to you turning completely to organic. And coming from Punjab, lot of time we discuss about wheat and paddy. And we are blamed as a farmer like never before. Even if you see the smoke, anything, the first name will be Punjab, burning straw, lot of such story we are listening. So what I want to ask you, is it possible to have anything in between? We are talking about GMOs, Monsanto and farmers, they are protesting. And on the other side, we are completely, trying to shift to organic. And can we afford to shift? Isn't a change should be gradual? First, we have to correct the practices. We are totally confused. There is zero budget farming, there is organic farming, there is GMOs. How we
just
decide?
identify yourself once, please. You just tell us your name.
So I want to ask, isn't possible to shift to good agriculture practice first
All right.
before we talk
You
about
bring
ideal
your-
situation?
Your name, sir?
Puneet Singh.
Acha, Puneetji. Yeah. Maybe both of you can react and we'll make that your closing remark.
Yeah. So, organic is first and foremost a food system and a worldview. A worldview. A worldview is a gestoid. It's there or it's not there, it flips in a moment. Its original meaning was based on living systems. Yeah? And I don't think we can afford to ignore the living systems in the soil, in the plants, in insects that are the very basis of food systems. Yes, Punjab was put on the wrong road, by making it grow only rice and wheat with water intensity, chemical intensity, and we have the results, which is what my book is all about. And I don't think the Punjab farmer should be blamed. I think every foundation which drove Punjab into that policy and put the conditionalities. Lal Bahadur Shastri ji refused. He said, it's an experiment, I'll do it on a small scale. If it works for us, we'll adopt it. And then the conditionalities continued. I think there is a responsibility there that needs to be had. So as far as worldview is concerned, a worldview is like a Schrodinger's cat, half dead and half alive. You either think holistically and in living systems, or you think of the soil as an empty container, the seed as an empty container. It's a statement made by Monsanto in the last hearing of the 3J case was, the seed is merely an empty container. We have to shift to a systems perspective. That's what a food system dialogue is about. And a systems perspective means every relationship must count. Second, we have to bring diversity back into agriculture, because it's the only way to solve every problem of the ecology, the farmer, and the volatile prices. This was a point made also by the Gates representative. Diversification of Punjab was being offered as shifting from rice and wheat to hybrid maize, and then probably BT maize. That's not diversification. Moving from one monoculture to the next monoculture is not diversification. Diversity means bringing diversity to your farm and having Punjab agriculture diversified again. That's a tough job, but it still needs to be made. And as far as the confusions are being created between different schools, there are confusions being created between different communities in this country. There's a divide and rule dominant paradigm at work, and the divide and rule paradigm works wonderfully for the powerful, and we have to, at every level, whether it's cultural or epistemic or in schools of agriculture, absolutely refuse the divide and rule and have dialogue, have the diversity. And it's not that we are beginning today. The organic movement as a chemical-free movement, in the dictionary, the word organic as chemical-free begins in 42 already. Because Bahawat's book was already done by 1930. And this triggered the shift. So it's both a worldview and chemical-free farming. Chemical-free farming grew hand in hand with chemical farming. So it's not the case that we don't have the science, we don't have the data. We have the data from around the world. And the FAO studies are showing that agroecological systems are giving us higher food security, higher ecological security. I think instead of saying the extension systems have failed, we should recognize they did the job they were designed to do, spread the chemicals. They now need another role. And that other role has to be to protect the resources that make food possible, to basically bring dignity and respect to the annadatas, and put that at the center of the economy, as Avik mentioned. And finally, in my view, we cannot escape from the quality of food. Good food for all has to be a right for all. I am working on the fact that our PDS system should be now focusing on healthy eating, which is, I think the ragi issue in Karnataka has already made a shift. These are shifts we need to make. And there is no reason for the Punjab farmer to be blamed. We are there with the Punjab farmer to make a shift to sustainability, equity, justice, dignity.
Mehta, one or two small little words. Good practices, technology, improved systems. ये सब दिल्ली में बैठ के बनाते हैं हम लोग. These are all made in Delhi. Your great-grandfather's photo, do you have it in your house? He knew good practice. Or it will be scandalous for you to say that I know better than him. For thousands of years, farming has evolved. I have seen rice varieties, which are beautiful. A farmer in Nagaland, I told him, why does it have these wings? What work does this do? He said, no, I like it. I just like the look of this seed. So this is the quality of people we are talking about. You know? So good practices are with you. Just trace a few generations back, look back. We are not in a position to give you any solutions. We can only make your life more complicated. Believe me. I've tried it again and again. My little farm, आपके यहाँ के हिसाब से 2 acre farm produces the highest tonnage of rice compared to all other fields. My village has about 300-400 acres of land. And I can't say it's organic. I don't know from whose field, what DAP, what pesticide is coming into mine. But I haven't invested 1 rupee in any fertilizer or pesticide. It's already giving. So in my little village, and I'm not crusading there or doing anything. People are already saying, "Yaar, mere ko de do. Give me some of your seeds. Let me try this Bahurupi." So it's a system which evolves, moves forward when there is one Masiha. Now, if you're going to have Masihas who had created the problem and now again are coming to solve your problem, then you are in trouble.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shah. I'll tell you what, we have to go for a discussion. They're here. You can have a separate dialogue with them offline. As has the format of this discussion, we want to give about half an hour to 2 discussion groups. So on the left-hand side of the room, I will suggest all those who wish to discuss the whole issue of how do you sustain farmers? What is the way forward? What are the key issues when it comes to sustainability and ensuring that farmers, their livelihoods, their incomes are sustainable? That's one part. So either of the 2 of you are willing to be part of this discussion, we'll be very happy. Okay, you need to go. The second, on this side of the room, the right hand, my right hand side, that is, your left hand side, we will discuss the issue of production and production systems. So, is it simply producing more or having better systems of production? These are the topics. You're free to choose whichever group you want to be a part of, and each group should select one leader who will summarize the key points that have been discussed. So this is where we conclude this part of the discussion. Anything else we need to? All right. So you just break or up into these 2 groups.
Prices. You are saying the government should shift its financial support from subsidizing fertilizer, urea, ammonia, DAP, etc., or subsidizing diesel, and instead give X amount of money. That's what you're suggesting.
Provided that you check, put check and balances that the prices of those subsidized items will go.
तो मतलब आप चाह रहे हैं संतुलन एक. This is exactly what I don't understand what Avik Saha has to say. It is not either or. दोनों चाहिए. Am I right?
Yeah, sure.
And you need subsidized diesel, you need subsidized fertilizers, etc. And you also need, over and above all this, some additional financial support.
लोगों के पास कौन है और जो जितने भी मतलब फार्मर जो खेती करते हैं तो ये मतलब जो गैस ट्रांसफर की बात करते हैं जो गैस उनके पास डायरेक्ट नहीं जाएगा, ये 15% जो लैंड ऑनर्स हैं उनके पास चला जाएगा. तो इस पे हम कैसे?
आपका कहना है कि जिन लोग को मिलने का ज़्यादा
ये मैं नहीं कह रहा, पर उन लोगों को डायरेक्ट हम कैसे दे
जो जमीन का मालिक है और जो खेत में काम
उनको नहीं कैसे मिलेगा वाला प्रश्न शायद हम दूसरे राउंड में लेंगे. अगर सरकार को यही करना है तो सचमुच में जो खासकार है उन तक कैसे वो आप शायद 10 मिनट के बाद क्या.
मैडम मैं इसमें ऐड करना चाहूँगा. आजकल गवर्नमेंट ने पॉलिसी बना दी है जो खेती करता है उसी के पास में उसका बेनिफिट जाएगा. जैसे अगर मैंने कंपल्सरी कर दिया उसको एफिडेविट देना पड़ेगा, तहसीलदार के यहाँ सिकमीनामा करना पड़ेगा, कैश चेक उसके पास चला जाएगा. हाँ, लीगलाइज कर दिया.
तो मतलब इस विषय के ऊपर हम सब एक साथ है कि जो भी सरकार जो बेनिफिट्स दे
हैं, चरुदार दे रहे हैं, ये जो खुद काम कर रहे हैं जमीन के ऊपर, कल्टीवेटर जो है, इनको मिला, ठीक है, करेक्ट। और आशीष जी, आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगे? Farmer needs right price. The question is, what is right price? How to determine that, and who is going to pay for it? उन्होंने बताया, what over the year. What? No, I'm not about history. I'm not about history. Let's keep it aside.
Price commission is Delhi only. They will sit in Delhi. They will fix the price of the commodities. How they know it? How much spending farmer for each acre? How much getting back to the farmer?
Yes, but diversity बहुत है ना?
How much?
Same wheat. You see the productivity of Punjab and Madhya Pradesh.
We want the good price. That's all. We don't want any subsidy and all. We want good price.
हमारा क्वेश्चन तो प्रोडक्टिविटी का है कि सिस्टम
Production
कौन सा होता है हमारे पास? मार्केट
क्या जीरो कैसे हो सकता है?
ज़्यादा दाम लेके जीरो की
नेसेसिटी जो है ना, उसी की वजह से चेंजेस हो रहे हैं ना, नेसेसिटी की वजह से चेंजेस, पॉलिसी की जो नेसेसिटी किसकी, नेसेसिटी पीपल ऑफ पंजाब की और नेसेसिटी गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया, किसकी नेसेसिटी, कौन सी, किसके बारे में पॉलिसी किससे बढ़ती है? हमारी पॉलिसी का नहीं,